Center for the Study of World Religions, Harvard Divinity School.
It's my pleasure to welcome our first panelist. The panel is entitled Embodied Wisdom, and please join me in welcoming David Appelbaum to this podium.
Can we say that Gurdjieff's teaching is primarily directed toward the body? Thank you. A remembering of the body. In a provisional way, can we remain open to an unknown direction? Can we say that the teaching forbids compelling the body in any way? That is rather for the body rather than against it? And can the question bring a reorientation, a return to experience, or an experience of return? What is there to discover is an opening that closes and gives me back to the confusion of everyday experience, leaving only an intimation of the beyond. What calls? There is in the body a source that remains a mystery. It is a singular indication of an influence that, when felt, has the power to transform the body. We are reminded of Gurdjieff's appeal to the biblical awake, die, be reborn. Only when studying experience carefully does one become sensitive to the absence, but not with dreams of impossible realizations. One needs the aim of the work to awaken. Over time and with application, we learn that the attention must become much more precise, more free of things to which it attaches, that it must become less inertial without betraying its passive side. It must finally learn the meaning of the simple gesture, let. One doesn't know much about the body without the mediating word about. But from a work with or from the body, a work foundational in Gurdjieff's legacy, a basis, the cornerstone of the temple on which to further understanding of the human condition. It begins an octave of work. It is an initiation through which any seeker of awakening must pass. Alas, there is an evasive ambiguity. Can we investigate that experience which any talk of the body seeks to express, that which lies at the heart of the body experience, in action or in rest? It lacks a name, but one could say it is simply pure movement, stripped of all qualities. Then, when it affects the body, it makes it what it is and how it serves a search to awaken. Why do we lack an impression of embodied life? We have impressions of our lives as bodily, but they are sensory. The senses message us about things outside and in, coded as sensations. What we remember of our life is a collection of memory traces. The memory suspends the need for anything but the lowest level of attentiveness. Gurdjieff's prime axiom follows: man is asleep. In that state, an impression of embodied life, being body life, is missing. Impressions of this or that impose themselves without effort. By contrast, an impression of embodied life in its appearance requires a voluntary act. Embodied life is the impression of impersonal animating force contained within the vessel of the physical body. In Gurdjieff, it is the second body, the body question, that offering an impression of itself indicates the existence of another life, of a kind other than that of biological existence. The life force in a moment of balance, when thought, feeling, and sensation are in a dynamic equilibrium, is felt directly. That experience is different in kind, in level, from what takes place every day. An automatic collaboration of perception and memory has been stilled. One is able to step back from the foreground, which holds reactions to the situation, and turn toward an essence hidden in the background. In this turn is a preliminary offer of freedom. Because the sensation of embodied life is an anomaly, it appears without a cause. The power of volition that harnesses the body in service of self-interest has been surrendered. One stops, submits to a situation, and awaits a response to it. If only for a moment, the experience of embodied life appears in the empty place. The emptiness doesn't disappear, nor is it replaced by the impression. Embodied life shows itself against a background that has no boundaries. It presents itself with an experience of limitless spaciousness, an experience of scale, of a higher level, of the divine, the resonance of stillness. At the same time, there is a practice that respects the mystery of without putting it to rest. Central to Gurdjieff's thought, it offers indications of a miraculous endowment, the sensation of embodied life. Greater or lesser, it is recognizable in its immediacy and directness. With it comes an awareness of the paradoxical sensation. Two disparate things, the body and the life embodied, are in some miraculous fashion conjoined in one seamless event, my life. Blending produces a new experience of wholeness. The life I live is felt to be whole, as well as I who live it. Yet the two energies remain distinguishable. Let me pause with that phenomenon. Something unmanifest is felt to enter the sphere of ordinary human experience. Can one say that a formless energy has been transformed into matter and brought to one's most private intimacy? The question remains a question. Madame de Salzmann offers a suggestion. The descent of spirit occurs in a materialization that takes on a definite density to become apparent to us. It is the event of incarnation. We know the impression of embodied life is highly perishable. It must constantly be replenished. Over time, a new substance combines materials of two different levels, but is neither one nor the other, and is accumulated. It has the force to consciously direct establishment of consciousness. It marks the birth of a new entity, a new body. Eckhart uses the metaphor of pregnancy when talking of transformation. When we talk of embodied when we talk of embodied wisdom, the heart of our theme is incarnation. It signifies a precise moment when a conscious intelligence, whose origin lies on a higher level, and which differs in kind from our earthly mentality, appears. We are called to bear witness to the event, and more especially to attest to the collaborative nature of its call. A willing determination is needed to actualize the second body and to allow its virtual reality to have an influence on daily life. Determination is the key ingredient in the practice of participation. When it occurs, we become, in Gurdjieff's thought, assistants to the Creator. We become co-creators in a cosmos of unspeakable immensity and complexity that at the present time is in danger of running down, growing dark to consciousness, dying. Thank you.
Teshbuchtoi koro datli tioto kadisto ramsabachto. I'm grateful to Professor Cusack and all responsible for inviting me here to share my research into Gurdjieff and the relation of the Emerald Tablet, which he often cited, to his ideas and methods, especially his Zoroastrian contemplation and movements. This is the Arslan Tash tablet, estimated 7th century BC from northwest Syria. The story in which the Emerald Tablet is embedded suggests that the tablet as an artifact was envisioned similar to the Arslan Tash tablet, an amulet or talisman with spiritual, even supernatural significance, self-consciously in the tradition of Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets, but written in the prestige language of Syriac, as the Arslan Tash tablet is inscribed in the prestige language Phoenician, and thus claiming the authority of the ancient tradition. These two extracts from Gurdjieff set the tone for this presentation. From the manuscript exercise 3 and 7, represent to yourself the three forces. Feel them well. The three forces are God. Making contact with God is our goal, but it is not attainable now. And from the tales, humans can, by the conscious and intentional fulfilling of being park dog duty, that is, conscious labours and intentional suffering, utilize three holy forces for their own presences and become such individuals as have their own sacred law of Tria Kamno, the law of three, and thereby the possibility of consciously taking in and coating in their common presence all that holy, which also aids the functioning in them of objective or divine reason. I would contend that a common interpretation of the Emerald Tablet and Gurdjieff system is possible, namely that the principles of creation and existence are analogous on every cosmic level and can be embodied. There are three broad perpetual processes: creation, transformation, return. The one creates the diversity of phenomenal existence. Humanity, or more precisely, individual humans, can assimilate and transform higher elements, crystallizing a soul wherewith to return in accord with the law of three, the Trinity. The Emerald Tablet furnishes a concise, if coded, overview of all this. The necessary alchemical transformation, according to the law of seven, is represented in Gurdjieff's food diagram, thus providing further details as to the unfolding of the processes. I suggest that the preamble to the tablet is of some significance in setting the context for its 13 lines. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the one God, Amen. What was said by the priest Sergius of Nablus concerning his entry into the dark tomb. He said that he acquired this wisdom from the last book of Baalinas, the wise, and he came upon the Sheikh seated on a throne of gold, and in his hand a tablet of emerald written in Syriac, the true language. In it is the true explanation that cannot be doubted, and I suspect this is an allusion to the opening of the second surah of the Quran, implying that the text of the tablet is scripture, perhaps even a revelation. The tablet then speaks of the creation. It says that the highest is from the lowest, and the lowest from the highest. It worked all wonders from one. All things are gathered from that essence by the direction of the one. It worked what is most wonderful. It is the origin of the world and its custodian. Its father is the sun, and its mother is the moon. The wind carried it in its womb, and the earth nourished it. It is the father of talismans and the treasurer of wonders, perfecting strength, keeping all lights in their right course. Fire became our earth, and it then speaks of the processes of transformation. Separate earth from fire, and the subtle will be yours. Attend to that which is coarse with gentleness and wisdom. And it moves on to the return, but also the transformation which perpetually continues. It ascends from the earth to the heavens, it acquires lights from above, then descends to the earth. And in it is the strength of above and below, because with it is the light of lights, and thus the darkness will flee from it. The strength of the strong, it takes possession of all which is fine, and enters into all which is coarse. Finally, in accordance with the ancient Semitic tradition, there is a summation which recapitulates the entire document, short as it is. Thus is the formation of the greater world and the formation of the smaller world. All worlds were formed thus. Thus inscribed Hermes, threefold in wisdom. This is his final book, which he hid underground. I would offer a polyvalent interpretation of lines 4 following. They can be read as both traditional alchemy and as spiritual alchemy. A higher body is nursed in the earth of the physical body from the blending of the three creative forces, the sun equivalent to the active, the moon to the passive, and the wind to the harmonizing. In both the Emerald Tablet and Gurdjieff, the law of three acts within a body upon substances, what Gurdjieff called hydrogens and the Emerald Tablet called lights. It acts upon substances of diverse fineness or subtlety to produce a new and higher body which is capable of returning to the source. Uspensky quotes Gurdjieff as saying, "Learn to separate the fine from the coarse." This principle from the Emerald Tablets of Hermes Trismegistus refers to the work of the human factory. And if a man learns to separate the fine from the coarse, that is, he brings the production of the fine hydrogens to its possible maximum, he will by this very fact create for himself the possibility of an inner growth which can be brought about by no other means. Inner growth, the growth of the inner bodies of man, the astral, the mental, and so on, is a material process completely analogous to the growth of the physical body. Gurdjieff saw the tablet as referring to his first and second conscious shocks, which separate and transmute the higher active elements from the foods we receive, through which we can then create the higher body. It is a simplification, but perhaps a fair simplification, to say that the exercises aim to attract, digest, and assimilate higher hydrogens or lights, blending them with substances already localized in the body. The process is directed by attention so as to nourish and strengthen all brains so that the human food factory can work in peak condition. The exercise 3 and 7 alludes to the Emerald Tablet and Genesis when suggesting certain representations. And at the end, Gurdjieff says, "Always remember that what is above is like what is below. Man, in a small way, is an exact image of the universe." Transformed contemplation often utilizes representations, picturings, and imaginings, examples of what he called mentation by form in the tales. This means that what is understood through them is not completely exchangeable or translatable into mentation by thought, which always employs words. The exercises help form a higher being, body, or soul, inter alia, through a higher sensation. And Gurdjieff distinguished conscious sensation from organic sensation. Impulses are organic if they are unintentional, and psychic if they are conscious and intentional. I am paraphrasing my teacher George Adey when I conjecture that in the Gurdjieff system, attention raising physical sensation to consciousness charges the crucible of the body, yet further enhancing consciousness of sensation and awakening the feeling of I am. With the effort to transform negative emotions into positive, the hydrogens needed for the formation of the higher bodies are digested and assimilated within the crucible of the body. If this occurs sufficiently often and intensely, the astral body crystallizes, permeating the physical body. The mental body is similarly formed. When these three bodies are crystallized, then real I, can manifest more fully and frequently, perhaps even becoming permanent. Gurdjieff told his pupils that the movements include a visual representation of cosmic laws. Number 33, Cosmic Rhythm, dramatically presents the food diagram. A student at the back center represents the crown of the head, a priestess, surrounded by 4 others. And this is the beginning of the cosmic rhythm. Some students then move out when the priestess descends, expressing the transmutation through contact of hydrogens localized in the body and then moving to the 4 limbs. And now to draw the diverse lines together, Uspensky quoted Gurdjieff as saying, "Among the formulas giving a summary of the content of many symbols, there was one which had a particular significance, namely the formula as above, so below, from the emerald tablets of her mistress Megistus. This formula stated that all the laws of the cosmos could be found in the atom or in any other phenomenon which exists as something completed according to certain laws. This same meaning was contained in the analogy drawn between the microcosm, man, and the macrocosm, the universe. The fundamental laws of triads and octaves penetrate everything and should be studied simultaneously both in the world and in man." And also, Gurdjieff mentioned the law of unity. But to conclude, Gurdjieff himself said in the exercise 3 and 7 to which I have alluded, "Now think that even in this parlor, in this room, these 3 forces are present because they are everywhere. And perhaps your prayer can join with the upward forces to return to its source." This then is the vocation of humanity according to Gurdjieff and the Emerald Tablet. And it is, I think you might agree, a noble one. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Dave Seamon, and I want to thank the Center for inviting me to present at this conference. And I'm particularly grateful to Carol Cusack, who was the first academic to suggest that as somebody practicing the work, that I begin writing academic entries about the work. The topic today is Gurdjieff, Phenomenology, and Embodied Wisdom. And if I could have the next slide. This is the title slide. And you'll notice that I've extended the title with this line from the poet Frances Thompson. She sees the is beyond the seems. And what I want to argue next slide, in the talk is that this emphasis on the reality of being and the obligation of seeing the reality of being is a central focus of both the Gurdjieff tradition and phenomenological research. And I want to argue that Gurdjieff's system offers one of the most thorough phenomenologies of human being and experience that we yet have. Next slide, please. First of all, phenomenology. I would define phenomenology most simply as the careful description and interpretation of human experience. Much more could be said, but this really is the starting point for this philosophical tradition. Next slide, please. There are 2 key phenomenological notions that have been very important in my research and writing. First of all, the life world, the taken for granted pattern and context of everyday life, normally unnoticed. Secondly, the natural attitude, the unquestioned acceptance of the things and experiences of everyday life. In other words, the natural attitude is the unquestioned acceptance of the life world. Next slide, please. What the phenomenologist aims to do is to move into what's called the phenomenological attitude. In other words, making the life world a focus of scholarly attention. Next slide. One of the major themes that has developed in phenomenological research over the decades is the topic of the lived body. And this is where we get a link with embodied wisdom. By lived body, the phenomenologist refers to a body that simultaneously experiences, acts in, and is aware of a world that normally responds with immediate pattern, meaning, and contextual presence. Next slide. In this work, the research, the writings of the French phenomenologist Merleau-Ponty has become central, particularly his idea of body schema or body subject, which is the precognitive intelligence of the body manifested through action and intertwining with the world at hand. Merleau-Ponty points out how so much of everyday life, habits and routines, are grounded in the body subject. Next slide. If we turn to Gurdjieff, we see many aspects of how the habitual body, the lived body, plays a role in human life. For example, Gurdjieff says that people don't act, but react. He says that human life is mechanical. He says people live in a walking sleep. He says that people are three-centered beings, and one of the centers relates to the body. Next slide. This idea of three-centeredness becomes a major link with the phenomenology of lived body and embodied wisdom. He says we have an intellectual part focused in the head, an emotional part focused in the breast, and a bodily part relating to the base of the spine and the limbs. Next slide. Importantly, Gurdjieff emphasizes that there are two complementary aspects of the body portion of human life. And he calls these the instinctive center and the moving center. The instinctive center relates to the automatic, innate workings of the body. We're talking about breathing, swallowing, blinking, bodily healing. On the other hand, there's the moving portion of the bodily significance of human life. This he calls the moving center, largely because it involves movement. In other words, learned bodily behaviors that have become second nature. For example, typing, riding a bicycle, operating a machine, making breakfast. These would all be examples of situations in everyday life, largely grounded in the moving center. Next slide. Therefore, immediately, and this is really quite remarkable, we have an interconnected matrix of four different starting points of human experience. So we can talk about the intellectual center involving thinking, deciding, planning, figuring out, and so forth. We can talk about the emotional center In other words, feelings, both positive and negative. We can talk about the moving center and the learned bodily behaviors and actions. We can talk about the instinctive center, these inborn bodily processes that require no learning. Next slide. Next, very interesting. Oh, go back. Stay here. Yes, we need this first. All right, now, I always found this fascinating when I discovered Gurdjieff, this idea of different modes of attention or no attention. We start out with no attention, and Gurdjieff says this grounds automatic habitual behaviors and situations. For example, riding a bicycle, we really don't need any attention once we're a master of the bicycle. There's also attracted attention. And this involves situations where something in the world draws our attention and holds us. For example, watching a favorite movie over and over, or reading a favorite novel over and over, or watching a favorite sporting event. Last, we have directed attention, where one makes an intentional effort to hold awareness to the task at hand. And this would involve any kind of learning, learning to keyboard, learning algebra, learning a new language, learning how to read music. All of these situations in human life would require directed attention. Next slide. What we can next do is relate these modes of attention and no attention to the four centers. So we have this rich, interconnected, multivalent matrix of human life and human experience. Next slide. What I'm trying to do here is to quickly overview these modes of possibility in relation to attention. So here we have the intellectual part of the emotional center. This would involve directed attention. And we're talking about the inner place of artistic creativity, vision, and creation. Next slide. Here we have the emotional part of the intellectual center. And this is said to involve the desire to know and the pleasure of knowing, the dissatisfaction of not knowing. Next slide. Here we have the moving part of the emotional center, which involves no attention, habitual emotional reactions. So we become irritated when somebody cuts us off on the expressway as we're driving along. Next slide. What I want to end with is the bodily portion of this matrix. And I want to focus on the moving center. Next slide. So if we look at the moving center, remember this involves learned bodily movements. If we look at the moving part of the moving center, which largely involves no attention, we're talking about these learned bodily behaviors. Simple actions like walking or climbing stairs, but more complex actions as well, like getting dressed, swimming, driving, bed making, and so forth. Very interesting. It's this aspect of the moving center which Merleau-Ponty highlights via his notion of body subject. Next slide. If we move to the emotional part of the moving center, remember this involves attracted attention. Here we can locate the pleasure of bodily competence, the love of movement, including dance, craft, and athletic performance, the enthusiasm for sport, the enjoyment of watching movement if one is not involved directly. Next slide. Here we have the directed attention related to the moving center. Very interesting part of the moving center, said to involve mechanical inventiveness, being able to figure out how things work, having a good sense of direction, being good with one's hands. My father ran a garage, and farmers, especially far and wide, would bring their combines. They would bring their tractors to my dad because he could always figure out what the mechanical problem was and fix it. He was absolutely remarkable in terms of this part of the moving center. Next slide. What I've tried to do in this talk is to illustrate the possibilities that Gurdjieff's understanding of human experience means for a phenomenology of human being, a phenomenology of human life. It's really quite extraordinary, the richness of the descriptive fabric that Gurdjieff offers us. And I do think his work, and also what phenomenologists are attempting, is to move toward this is that Thompson speaks about rather than the seems. Now, obviously, in the Gurdjieff tradition, this kind of understanding is not an end in itself, as it would be for a phenomenological study. It has much more to do with self-discovery and self-transformation. But I do think it is really remarkable and offers extraordinary potential for a fuller phenomenological picture of human life. Next slide. To conclude, as a practitioner of the Gurdjieff work, I have conflicting feelings about drawing on Gurdjieff's system for a phenomenology of human experience. On the one hand, I recognize that these ideas are not ends in themselves, but parts of a much more comprehensive system that can contribute to individual self-development and personal transformation. On the other hand, I emphasize that Gurdjieff's understanding of human being offers a remarkably comprehensive and accurate picture of what human life and human experience are. In the last decade especially, academic research on Gurdjieff has proliferated, and it may be time for work practitioners to realize this interest and participate as much as possible to facilitate discussions of the Gurdjieff work that are an accurate and appropriate rendition of work principles. The alternative may be inaccurate, unhelpful renditions that cast the tradition in an erroneous or unfavorable light. We have an obligation to reality, and phenomenology and the Gurdjieff tradition helps us move toward that obligation. Thank you for listening.
I was going to say something about, on the film last night, the way the movements showed precisely what Jean-Claude was saying over the voiceover, that the influence that Gurdjieff brought from his travels in the East when he was a young man, and this extraordinary transference or introduction or ability to bring something from ancient knowledge into the 20th century. And at the same time, it's very clear that with the creation of the movements that Gurdjieff used anything, absolutely anything that he felt would help in the way of challenging the class, the participant, to see and experience the automatism of his body, particularly of the body. And anyone who has taken part in movements will see that this process, by repetition, the result of this process is that drop by drop, something is deposited somewhere. It's not even something one can describe, other than that there is a deposit of something which one could call knowledge in a different language. And it also then refers to the fact that the movements are also called a language. But they're not a language of words, of course. Perhaps one could draw an analogy between the grammar being the secret language and big words being the form, the vocabulary. Well, if you just spoke with vocabulary, you'd have a lot of powerful things to say, but they wouldn't mean anything. There would be nothing to receive, nothing to communicate, except these large shocks. So if this inner language is secret, it's secret from what? It's secret from me, it's secret from the ordinary me. Something is needed to allow this inner language to be freed to embody the outer part of the language. Without that, you have this and that. There is no link. The class is the link, can be the link. But something has to be called, something has to be committed. The body is completely automatic in its nature. It simply follows patterns, habits. As I stand here now, I can sense that there are certain tensions in my body. I have a particular thing with my left shoulder, for instance, where tensions gather. And all of this is part of this automatic life. But the positive side to all of this is that inside us also live these gestures and postures. Everything, not only gestures and postures, but by moments sometimes one can feel that everything exists inside. I belong to everything. So when one takes a posture, for instance, is it possible to connect the outer with the inner? This guide to a kind of precision. It's not a robotic accuracy. It's a question of an inner sensitivity that can link, join together, so that a third force can appear in this situation, which will appear through the movement. Now, all of this is high aims, but at the same time, it is drop by drop, this possibility to learn this other language, the language of transformation. It's a big word, but part of this process, I think, that Gurdjieff used, although he brought back the form from the East, I think the most important thing he came back with was how to construct through the laws, these famous laws of 7 and 3 that govern the universe. With that, and what he refers to in Beelzebub as lawful inexactitudes, something which can be planted into a movement, into a sequence of rhythms or attitudes, something that creates a shock in the body because the body doesn't like something that shouldn't be there. It likes to flow. It's organic. And he used the Morse code. Extraordinary. You couldn't find anything less to take something like that and plant it into the movement so that the body is woken up by the fact that, first of all, when you're in a movements class, you can't get out of it. In life, when we meet these situations, we find the way to escape, to find more comfort, to pleasure, whatever it is. And all that is happening under the surface, unconsciously. But in this situation, he's created a kind of life of such intensity, because it's still life. But it's protected by the fact that, or we are protected in the class by the fact that we can't escape. We have to stay. We have to try. We are forced to try, which is against our nature. So, in order to find something that can find this urge to not to take, but in this moment of entering a struggle between these two forces, the one which refuses and the awakening of this other force that wishes to try. Something needs to enter this situation. And because we can't escape from it, the possibility is always there. One repeats, one tries, nothing happens, one tries, and then at a certain moment, there's like a flash of something. And a feeling appears. A feeling that is for, which is against all of the nature of my no, 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 no. And so it's a kind of miracle. So I'd like to say a lot more, but and I thought I wasn't going to be able to say anything, so that's it.
cswr.hds.harvard.edu copyright 2024, the President and Fellows of Harvard College.